Hi, so it's the 1st of July 2021. There's a few notable things about this date. Um, First of all, in London, Prince William and Prince Harry unveiled a statue of their mother. This would have been Diana's 60th birthday, and I've made previous videos about Diana, Princess of Wales, a remarkable woman. So that's a poignant thought that she would have been 60 today. I've mixed views about the statue. I think I like the fact that she's sort of with children in that sense, but I don't know about the statue itself. I'm not sure if it's a great likeness. But anyway, the other thing is this is 105 years today since the Battle of the Somme, the opening of the Battle of the Somme, in which some 19,240 British servicemen died, including a distant relation of mine. Bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. That was 105 years ago. Also Canada Day, so happy Canada Day to any Canadian viewers. And of course, they're dealing with a big heat wave at the moment, which is seems to be very serious. Right, but to get to the point of this video, 100 years since the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party. Um, I'm not going to make this too long, but basically, the BBC's just had a report on it, and Xi Jinping has made a speech to a crowd, assume in Beijing. I think it was Tiananmen Square, and basically, it's typical communist thuggery that's been seen before. It's the sort of thing that, sort of extreme jingoistic rabble rousing that happened in Mao's day as well. And he basically said, anyone who dares to bully China will have their heads smashed against a wall by 1.4 billion people. And of course, there was a big cheer. And this is the true ugly face of the CCP. I mean, Xi Jinping showing himself to be a thug. He is a dictator, but he's showing himself to be a thug as well. I don't know if even Vladimir Putin will come out with something like that. And it's not the first time Xi has. You know, when he attends world summits and when he attends meetings with other world leaders, he's quite soft spoken, relatively diplomatic, and so on. This is the true ugly face of communism, and particularly the Chinese brand of communism. It's actually very manipulative because when you're saying that the tensions with the West are against the Chinese people, then what it's doing is it's playing up to jingoism. And it's the oldest trick in the book when it comes to dictators and totalitarian regimes on the extreme left and the extreme right. I mean, Hitler done the same thing, goes without saying. Mao certainly did. Um, and I have a feeling that as young Chinese in particular don't really think much about ideological communism, i.e., Marxist communism. I really think that for the last perhaps 10 to 15 years, the real kind of tool of the Communist Party of China has been ultranationalism. I believe that. I mean, if you look at every time they talk about, if someone criticizes them, they always frame it as when they counter critique their critics, it's always like you're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. And they always make this kind of thing where the Chinese people equals the CCP, which of course they don't. But there's a lot of contradictions and hypocrisies in the response because often you'll get Chinese nationals will complain, they'll say, "Oh, are not the government, don't judge us that way." But then they'll go on to defend the same rhetoric and the same attitude that the CCP has. So my message to those people is you can't have it both ways. You can't complain about being, put in the same bracket as the CCP when you're being apologists and propagandists for the CCP. But this rant by Xi, clearly it's to stoke up a domestic base. Um, but I really think that the audacity and the arrogance of the Chinese Communist Party to complain about bullying, it's just staggering. I'm pleased the BBC report didn't gloss over three big things. The Cultural Revolution, the Tiananmen Square crackdown, and the persecution of the Uyghur people today. The Chinese Communist Party is guilty of many crimes, but those three things particularly stand out. I mean, the iconic tank man at Tiananmen Square, but I think the images of those Uyghur men, sitting in rows with blue prison jackets on, uh, forcibly indoctrinated, that's going to be one of the glaring, shameful images that will be associated with the CCP today. Now, what do they want people to see? They want to see, these gleaming skyscrapers and a rising middle class and China's space program and its military prowess and all the rest of it. Um, but I really think that this issue of nationalism cannot be sidelined because it's very, very, very insidious. It's very powerful. I mean, if people are brainwashed into believing that any outside criticism is an attack on China, like they see it as their mother or the father. So, the Chinese are very proud people. They're nationalistic anyway, even without Xi riling it up. But that definitely has an effect. So I feel that now more than ever, liberal democracies have to be united on this. I think we need to be a lot more vocal. I think sanctions is one thing against, for example, those guilty of human rights abuses. I think the British government's done quite a bit more than some other governments have, but I think there's areas that we can still do more. I think that we need to look at tertiary education. I think we need to scrutinize academics who are too cozy with Beijing. I've spoken about this before, those who potentially are selling uh, or, passing over sensitive data, which could breach security. I think we need to look at Chinese students, frankly. And this is not something I say lightly because I've worked with them. But I think if Chinese students come to the UK, they need to be reminded that they're guests. The students. They're not here to wave the Chinese flag and push their way around to other students. I think that Chinese students who are found to be bullying or threatening Hong Kong peers, for example, they don't like the views about the CCP. I think they need to be expelled and then kicked out of the country. Um, I think we have a particular problem in this country with this obsession with so-called racism. So there's this insane conflation of criticizing the CCP and somehow being xenophobic. That needs to be confronted, really. And those idiots on the left, and it is predominantly the left, who conflate the two things, they just need to be challenged, and told of how ridiculous their position is, because it's just a barrier. I do think, if this is the sort of attitude that Beijing's going to take, like we will make these violent threats if you don't comply. Um, they need to understand that if they want respect on the world stage, it's a two-way street, and they're not going to get respect by acting like thugs. Um, I'm not just talking about Xi Jinping's rant, but also, the way they've dealt with coronavirus, trying to blame others, not taking responsibility in terms of accepting that it began in China, in terms of trying to blackmail other countries for PPE and so on. Basically, the long and short of it is, I think that we have to take this very seriously because, as it stands, in the near future, China might overtake the United States economically, possibly. I mean, not an economist, but maybe 10, 15 years. When that happens, as soon as China gets into the number one spot, which it has ambitions to do, then, we can look at things like the internet. Already you get Facebook and other companies, in my opinion, they're giving far too much ground to Chinese censors. But as soon as they get that number one spot, I think they could potentially control the internet, or at least have the tools to do so. So I think that we cannot be weak. We just can't. I'm well aware that individually, for example, the UK can't take on China. and most of the other countries can't. The United States is the only country that is more powerful than China. It's the only one. I put Russia at number three. So when she talked about bullying, it's the fact that other countries are united in their contempt for what China's doing. But I think we need to really go into overdrive. If this is a propaganda war, then we need to go into overdrive and throwing that straight back. For example, to point out the way that China threatened to boycott Australian wine simply because Australia called for an independent inquiry into COVID. I think we need to pretty much use the same wolf warrior diplomacy, so called, that Beijing uses, because I don't think that we stand up to these thugs by being polite. I really don't. Frankly, I think it's time for the gloves to come off. I don't want things to escalate, but I think that if she is going to insist on this sort of language, and if these wolf warrior diplomats think they can throw their weight around the world in other countries, we need to take the gloves off. And if it comes to the point of expelling the Chinese ambassador, so be it. There will be a reprisal. But, anyone who saw that speech that she gave and thinks that there is good intentions coming from Beijing needs to think again. The incredible naivety that some people have is infuriating. But, wherever it rears its ugly head, we need to just be aware of it. So I think this extends to Chinese nationals. If they're in the West, that's fine for tourism, for studies, for business, fine. But they need to understand that they're not here to promote the CCP or promote Chinese nationalism. And as far as I'm concerned, as soon as they do, they should lose their visa because they will be used as fifth columnists. If that sounds paranoid, then you just have to consider empirical evidence for this. This is not McCarthyism because there is absolutely hard empirical evidence that this is going on. So, whereas McCarthyism was a witch hunt, this is not the same thing at all. Um, but it sickens me because the tragic thing about this and the sad thing about this is that millions and millions of people in China are lapping it up. And in the case of younger people, they genuinely don't know about the crimes of the CCP, and older people know, but they're either being the subservient way out of fear, or it's just that it's a blind nationalism. So they know full well about the horrors of the Cultural Revolution, but for them, the number one thing is we have to save face. Um, and so if outsiders criticize China, even if we know that the CCP are thugs, we'll still defend them. That's the mentality that's at play here. And we need to understand that mentality. So I really think that I don't think the way to confront China is with weakness. I really, really don't. Um, I've seen how young people are brainwashed over there in terms of the nationalism. It's really, really indoctrinated from an early age. And it's very intense, very intense. The BBC has a Chinese language Facebook group, and I don't know why they bother because every other comment is things like, "Oh, BBC, are you going to criticize us for human rights?" or "BBC, bias Western media." It's just predictable, So people who, of course, have a VPN to use Facebook, but Chinese hypocrisy, Chinese arrogance, and Chinese thuggery. These three areas are very obvious, and they need to be exposed. I'm sick to death of Chinese communists thinking they can dare to lecture anyone else. So basically, I think we need to take the gloves off. I think we're too polite. I think we're too passive. I think we need to basically start being a bit more vocal about this, and if need be at world level. Um, of course, there'll be repercussions, but principled stances always have difficulty. They always have, you know, potential consequences. But, let the CCP mouth off. They will show to the world what they really are. And, you get countries like Pakistan under Imran Khan, which are basically lapdogs of China at the moment because of trade, because of other issues. But I don't think the Chinese Communist Party has many genuine friends. Possibly North Korea, possibly Russia at the moment. But these are mostly kind of allegiances due to um, geopolitical kind of setups rather than genuine values. I mean, you can't tell me Islamist Pakistan has values corresponding to communist China other than the fact they both have contempt for human rights. That's the one defining feature. But if the sort of culture that is in Pakistan was in China, then Pakistanis would be rounded up as terrorists. So it's a complete contradiction. Anyway, my final word is fuck you, Xi Jinping. You're a thug. And, those words are designed to intimidate. And I don't think we should be intimidated. And I call on Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab, and their counterparts around the world to just understand what these thugs in Beijing are trying to do and not accept it. I really think there's ways to do that.